Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is again Monday. We are commencing session 159 of Roadmap for a Moral Society. We welcome all of you as we continue the subject of strikes. We are sourcing again from semester questions of Abdu'l-Baha, and we believe that these writings, the writings from the Baha'is faith, the Baha'i scripture, the interpretations of Abdu'l-Baha, it gives us this roadmap to produce a functioning society that will advance forever, an ever advancing civilization for the next 1,000 years. We all know civilizations in the past have risen and fallen. We all know, historically speaking, that no society has outlasted the rigors, the trials, the deterioration that occurs over time naturally as some societies rise to prominence and they fall. We believe that these writings before us will produce a society that will last for at least 1,000 years. And furthermore, we join you on this journey, learning together, sourcing from the Baha'i writings, exploring subjects, and prayerfully, we are seeking truth together. With that said, we're going to begin with an opening prayer. It will set the tone of our discussion as we share our thoughts, our reflections on these holy writings, and further, we have an opener. I believe Armin volunteered today as well.
I did? Okay.
Well, is there a volunteer?
All right,
This
I'll go. That's fine.
Okay. And thank you, everyone. We'll begin.
O Lord, I have turned my face unto thy kingdom of oneness. I'm immersed in the sea of thy mercy, O Lord. Enlighten my sight by beholding thy lights in this dark night, and make me happy by the wine of thy love in this wonderful age. O Lord, make me hear thy call, and open before my face the doors of thy heaven, so that I may see the light of thy glory and become attracted to thy beauty. Verily thou art the giver, the generous, the merciful, the forgiving. Abdu'l-Baha.
Thank you very much. We're going to continue this subject from last week. And as usual, we're going to put the opener to see the implication of release of the Holy Spirit or the commandment of the latest manifestations impact on the society as a whole. Okay, so somebody wants to read this?
I'll go ahead and read it.
Okay.
This is from God's Passers-by, the Bab's Captivity in Azerbaijan, and the impact of Tahrir on the termination of the Islamic law. The trumpeter was a lone woman, the noblest of her sex in that generation, whom even some of her co-religionists pronounced her a heretic. And the call she sounded was the death knell of the 1,200-year-old law of Islam. Though divinely revealed law gathered further momentum, precipitated in a later age the annulment of the Sharia canonical law in Turkey led to the virtual abandonment of that law in Shiite Persia, has more recently been responsible for the disassociation dissociation of the system envisioned in the Kitab al-Aqdas from Sunni ecclesiastical law in Egypt, has paved the way for the recognition of that system in the Holy Land itself, and is destined to culminate in the secularization of the Muslim states and in the universal recognition of the law of Baha'u'llah by all the nations and the enthronement of the hearts of all peoples of the Muslim world.
So you see this issue regarding when the new manifestation comes in with the new laws, although people may not believe this, but it has a potent force that changes the humanity as a whole. And this is a very good example of it, as Shoghi Effendi explains here by Tahireh taking her veil off in front of the Orthodox Muslim that gathered in Badasht. That was the trumpet of termination of the Sharia law in the Islamic world. And now we see that just a simple act of revelation, how dissipates and changes the world, especially Islamic world, within the first 50 years of the dispensation itself, where majority of the Sharia law countries disappeared and moved into secular law. And of course, the prediction, as we read by Shoghi Effendi last session, related to that the clergy in Iran would come to power and they would get dissolved like an ice in the middle of July. So they would disappear. And these are predictions, and it's based on revelation itself, as people clearly see violation of those laws, like abolition of the ecclesiastical structure that exists in the prior religions. Violation of those are consequences. So now people in that part of the world, they're experiencing violation of the Baha'i law, and they're paying with their lives of violation of those laws. So this issue related to abolition of distinction in the material world, which Abdu'l-Baha promotes, completely clears away indoctrination of the prior religion, that there are brokers of God, that you can reach God through them. So this really clearly shows that dissipation of these new laws affect in the secular society or society as a whole. Similarly, in the sciences, nobody cares whether Isaac Newton was Jew or Christian. Actually, he was a very devout Christian or a Muslim. They used his knowledge to further civilization, material civilization. Similarly, when the release of this Holy Spirit or related revelation comes to reality, it dissipates and changes environment, because people recognize it, that those are efficient causes. There is no alternative to them. And whoever, individual, communities, societies, violate those, they get punished by their own hand. So this really very clearly shows these turmoils that you see in the Middle East today is a direct violation of those laws that was brought in over 100 years ago. Any comments on this? If not, we're going to go to our subject.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just a small comment. Along with the being the harbinger of a new dispensation, there was also an underpinning equally as important social revolutionary change, and that was equally in terms of the emancipation of women, which sits very firmly in this ongoing dispensation for the first time. The emancipation of women, the equality of men and women. So along with the, how to say, the earthquake of a new revelation and Tehran. Also, the underpinning message of that, it was on two levels. One was, you know, a new book, new laws, renewal of the covenant, and the other was a most waited for emancipation of women, and that's very necessary in terms of society's evolution toward the maturation of society, because women have been in bondage for centuries. So there, you know, that might be the second underpinning revolutionary social transformative process, but it happened around equally those two things is my point. Thank you.
No, of course. And you see that the women today, in especially that part of the world, are the champion of the revolution itself, where the males are custodian or the second wave, but most of the revolution in Iran was initiated by women. So it's really clearly shows that the impact of Tahirih in terms of opening up the eyes of women that they're equal to men and they have to defend their own freedom.
And Gilbert, as well as cutting the chains from, you know, the past revelation, she also freed women and cut their chains of bondage. And because revelation, particularly in this instance, was on two folds, you know. So thank you.
Right. Okay, let's read and go back to our strike.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, number 6. If matters were so arranged, neither would the factory owners amass each day a fortune which is absolutely of no use to them. Or should one's fortune increase beyond measure, one would become under the most heavy burden, become subject to exceeding hardships and troubles, and find such the administration of such an excessive fortune to be most difficult and to exhaust one's natural powers. Nor would the workers endure such toil and hardship as to become incapacitated and fall victim at the end of their lives to the direst need.
So here again, it shows that capitalism by itself doesn't have any equilibrium in terms of profit taking and compensating the investors, because that's their primary goal, to maximize their profit for people that invested in their company. But reality of it is that when there are markets where labor is abundant and purely based on labor acceptance of wages because of their abundance, may allow people with large capital to dominate those industries, and workers have no way of getting out of that equation. So this here, again, it says that amassing massive capital because the cost of labor can be controlled is not right. And obviously, when the capital gets accumulated, managing it would become very difficult and would breed corruption as well. So this really creates an environment that authoritarian regimes, like, for example, in Russia today, they're oligarch, which is handful of people that control majority of the markets. So this way, they basically set a stage in terms of what to pay and who, because of creation of monopolies, they can control the prices as well as wages that they give to people. So this particular image is from Rockefeller, which because of massive capital, they could go into many different industries and then clobber everybody else. So if capitalism without regulation would be applied, you would create monopolies, which are deadly in terms of for innovation and progress of scientific progress or economical progress as a whole. And obviously, it becomes a burden for those people how to manage it, because you can't have more than two places to sleep in, or a few cars that you have. So the key really becomes of those excess capital, is it put into producing jobs, or it's kept as an asset which doesn't help the economy to grow. So these are really key elements here that Abdu'l-Baha is trying to say, that the method should be devised so oligarchy would not exist. And based on people's effort, they would get a return and ability to compete in a free market environment. But in reality, also, when you're looking at even the supposedly most advanced economic system, which is United States, you have billions and billions of dollars worth of pensions that's supposed to be compensating for people when they retire, doesn't even exist, because cities, they have spent or borrowed against the pension plans. So practically majority of the large cities in the United States, to the tune of trillions, are not capable of paying the pensions for people. And the way that usually government get around this problem that they created for themselves is that they create inflation. So the value of the capital that they owe shrinks as they go day by day. So these are really key elements where you see deficiencies of the capitalistic system, purely capitalistic system. And of course, these are really notions that people, when they become to the end of their useful work age, there is really no real protection. And their savings may disappear because of the inflationary process. Now, when you're looking at last 20 years, or maybe a little bit more, the wages didn't keep up with the inflation. So what happens is that Americans in general, like our generation, which is baby boomers, had a adequate life that one person, head of the family, could earn for the whole family, and could accumulate enough for their pension or old age. But today, the children of baby boomers cannot hope for that. So reality of it doesn't change. And this is really where we're at right now. And if this deficit spending that borrows from the future and tries to satisfy political gains or advances of different groups causes this problem to exist. So the wage increases didn't keep up with the inflation. So buying power of the dollar has shrunk from 20 years ago or 25 years ago. So these are really areas that Abdu'l-Baha is addressing, which currently we're in that predicament.
And Gilbert, I was just thinking that the victims, I've also been doing some looking and research myself, and the United States actually prints money. It has this massive outstanding debt, and it actually prints money. And my heart goes out to millennials, anyone born after 1981, the suffering, economic suffering that is going to visit upon them because of the rapacity of capitalists and the current economic thing. So I just want to also add to that, Abdu'l-Baha tells us that the principal cause of these difficulties lies in the laws of the present civilization, for they lead to a small number of individuals accumulating incomparable fortunes beyond their needs, whilst the greater number remains destitute, stripped, and in the greatest misery. This is contrary to justice, to humanity, to equity. It is the height of inequity, the opposite to what causes divine satisfaction. And that money that's printed in your country to pay off debts, trillions of dollars of borrowed debt, is going to be the legacy of anyone born after 1981. And that is a sad state of affairs. And that is because of the fact that the systems and the laws that really should be in place to protect everybody are not so. Thank you.
No, of course, a good example of it is when recession occurred and the automobile company, as you know, transportation is the largest industry in the world. Of course, second to the construction is second. So first one is transportation, second is real estate and construction. When recession hit and both GM and Chrysler went belly up, the government had to come in and bail them out, not because they loved them or they wanted to help them. The problem was that each one of them had over $100 billion worth of pension that the government had to cover. So it was cheaper for the government to go and keep them afloat and bail them out and that's the problem of fight between labor and capital. If the labor says, no, I want to get maximum I can get, the capital says, okay, I'm not going to invest in the newer products. And what ends up happening is that competition catches on and the whole company goes belly up and the pension of people disappear. And this is really one of the very good examples that applies to this, that you cannot rely on pensions that the companies have because they can borrow against it. And this is really a major issue. All right. Any other comments? If not, we're going to go to the next.
It is therefore clearly established that the appropriation of excessive wealth by a few individuals, notwithstanding the needs of the masses, is unfair and unjust, and that conversely, absolute equality would also disrupt the existence, welfare, comfort, peace, and orderly life of the human race. Such being the case, the best course is therefore to seek moderation, which is for the wealthy to recognize the advantages of moderation in the acquisition of profits and to show regard for the welfare of the poor and the needy. That is, to fix the daily wage for the workers and also to allot them a share of the total profits of the factory.
Right. So now there is a movement. Remember, liberalism in general in the Western culture also was following very similar track. Initially, they were saying that they didn't want to have government involved in terms of providing services to general free market economy, but they wanted wages to be livable wages across. Then that liberal movement became different. Then they requested that government take those on their shoulders. So they introduced portion of the socialism into their system. And then today, which is very interesting, it's a new movement called neoliberalism, which actually is recommending exactly what we read here in terms of engaging labor into profits, making sure they take care of the environment and have a long-term view in terms of health of the company. So they model this as a company that would never think of dismantling or disappearing. So they would invest in the process and get the best talents and pay them well to make sure that the innovation is within the company and make sure that the company would survive. So this issue regarding that we're discussing here is a budding of the new migration of the liberalism, which is called neoliberalism, which is moving toward what Abdu'l-Baha was revealed in late 1800s.
And can I just give everybody what that actually is? Neoliberalism is a political and economic philosophy favouring free markets, minimal government intervention, deregulation, privatisation, and free trade, believing this best promotes economic growth and individual freedom, often involving reduced social spending and emphasis on private sector solutions, though, and this is a point, Gilbert, though critics argue it increases inequality. So that's interesting.
No, of course, but remember, this is a view, but what they're saying is that burden of the government in terms of social action would fall on the companies themselves. So when you're looking at companies like Tesla or Starbucks, for example, or now Amazon with their new grocery, they're moving toward that model in terms of providing, for example, food that doesn't harm people. So but their concept is exactly what we're talking about. They're responsible to make sure that the pension of the people that work there are safe and secure. So that's really their model in this new liberalism, generally. Obviously, if you shave it from perspective of regulation, by the way, this is a misnomer in terms of regulation that would create a better working environment or better expansion of the market. The regulations in general creates monopolies. And this is in every industry you can think of. And the reason is this, because when you put regulation in there, it creates barrier of entry into that market. Therefore, no innovation would be in there because bigger companies, multinational companies would welcome regulations because it blocks innovation and they can control the market. So these are really key elements where a good example of this type of new liberal companies, they wouldn't be selling sodas because soda is killing people. It creates diseases that we shouldn't have. So these are really part of this neoliberalism, which tries to stay away from government control or subsidies or market making by the government and allowing the corporation to take responsibility for their people as well as their investors. So that's really the true definition of those type of companies which started maybe past decade. These type of innovations is coming in to the market generally.
Having said that, one of the underpinning things to me is that all systems, all economic systems, including neoliberalism, the underpinning change that has to be made starts with each individual who imbibes ethical practice, because you can have a good model, but if the people the people inside it don't have any morals, then that system, even though it may be a good system, will fail to equalize or to ensure that people are treated with dignity. That's just my point. That's probably what the critics in terms of neoliberalism, well, they were probably looking at it from a more materialistic perspective, but that could be, looking at the underpinning changes that need to happen in the life of individuals, communities, societies, economics, and business. Thank you.
No, of course, but remember the whole issue of ethics in business, that's what neoliberalism is trying to do. That means that the ethics of what you produce that should not harm anyone, even if it's profitable. So these are really key elements that they're trying to introduce. Remember, none of these systems are complete or free from flaw. Only Holy Spirit, which you see here, that we're reading these documents, is broad enough to cover and brings in the ethics into the socioeconomic systems. When, ironically, the growth of these type of companies are much more rapid because they look at long term, at problems, not a quarter by quarter. So the whole, again, what I was trying to refer to is that these laws or suggestions that we see from the Holy Spirit already is taking roots because it's efficient cause.
Right. And I would just like to thank you for that. The other thing that I think with our inward lookingness, we're so busy trying to do what we need to do that we forget that unconsciously in society and in every part of our society, that this revelation and the raise in consciousness is not just centered on the Baha'i community itself. We're the example, but it radiates and it permeates society in general. So your point is being taken by me. Thank you.
Sure. So here again, it says moderation to profit taking and investing into the company, making sure your workers are healthy and they can provide for their families, as well as making sure that when they exhaust their useful working age, they have a comfortable retirement. So this is really the concept that is produced here by Abdu'l-Baha in late 1800s. So you see this concept, but this proposition has nowhere near socialism. As you see, the socialism where ownership of the capital or real estate is done or given to the government. So government would control resources and where to allocate it and how to allocate it. So the concept that we're seeing here is anti-socialism. All right. Next.
In brief, insofar as the mutual rights of the factory owners and the workers are concerned, laws must be enacted that would enable the former to make reasonable profits and the latter to be provided with their present necessities in their future needs, so that they become so if they become incapacitated, grow old, or die, and leave behind small children, they or their children will not be overcome by dire poverty, but will receive a modest pension from the revenues of the factory itself.
Right. So as you see, these are really classical example of how do you manage that? And the responsibility is on the owners of that company, which is stockholders of the company, to make sure that they provide an ecosystem so people would work wholeheartedly in the company and making sure it survives that and it generates and expand to the best of their abilities. So these laws, and we have many of these laws already in place, from safety of the basically workers and regulation related to type of products that you produce that shouldn't harm people, and so on and so forth. But in reality, unless you infuse the ethics into the system, and those, where do they come from? From the latest manifestation. The society will not be at ease or happy and in peace. Imagine you're working all your life and then you're a brilliant star in whatever area that you're in as far as your business, and suddenly you get hit by a terminal disease. Or you think that what would happen to my family or pension if you get disabled. Now we have Social Security. By the way, the Social Security within the next 5 to 10 years is going to go bankrupt anyways, because there isn't enough people contributing to it to pay the debt. And of course, the government borrows from it too, so there is nothing left. It's a very interesting playing with numbers in terms of the actual dollars to exist. So I have news for generation XYZ that if they're counting on collecting Social Security, they may not even be there for them. Although today is not much anyways.
And the other thing, Gilbert, you can stop printing, you can get the powers that be to stop printing money to pay off about 40 or 50 years of owed debt that's accumulating, so that millennials have a chance, anyone born after 1981, to have a bit of, financial security. Because the way it's going, things have to change really rapidly if in fact there isn't going to be a disproportionate amount of suffering amongst your society. Because you can't, the whole point of this is don't borrow money that you can't pay back. There are points there that we could learn from, so to speak. Thank you.
No, of course. But again, the system is designed in such a way that to basically convince the other party to vote for your pork belly, you have to bribe them to do that. And unfortunately, the taxpayer gets shortchanged in the middle. But the problem is much more severe. Actually, management of Office of Management and Budget, OMB, did a calculation. Collection of taxes in 2035 would only cover national debt service, defense, and Medicare. The rest of it, there is no money for it. And out of that, the corporate tax would be stagnant. That means for next 10 years, government collection for corporations would stay the same as it was within last 5 years. So what ends up happening is that bulk of the burden, which now is almost it's 1-to-1, I think it was 2024, 1-to-1, it would be almost 4 times more tax would collected from middle class, because poor people don't pay taxes, than today to cover the expenses. But corporation will not contribute to that. And that's why there is a danger in terms of loss of buying power by middle class, because they have to be taxed. Otherwise, the whole system would fall apart. All right.
And the other thing, Gilbert, just one last thing, that your middle class will be your lower class if things don't change. There will be no middle class, well, so we'll have to, what we'd have to do is just turn the power off to all the money printing machines so that reality checks have to happen. Thank you.
No, of course. But the problem with it is not that printing money directly generates the inflation. When I guess last administration pumped in $6 trillion in 4 years without any work to be done. They just distribute money without any work to be done. And guess what? Last 4 years, the inflation has been 22%.
Yeah. The other thing was, Gilbert, what I was trying to say is the debt that America's borrowed trillions and trillions of dollars from their friends, right? But my point is, they just, instead of paying it back, they just keep printing more money. Is like, it's insanity. Sorry, that's really weird.
That's the only way you can reduce the value of what you borrowed. To create inflation. When you create inflation, whatever you owe becomes smaller and smaller. That's the government's job. All right. Enough bad news. All right.
Okay, number 9. For their part, the workers should not make excessive demands, be recalcitrant, ask for more than they deserve, or go on strike. They should obey and comply and make no demands for exorbitant wages. Rather, the mutual and equitable rights of both parties should be officially fixed and established according to the laws of justice and compassion, and any party that violates them should be condemned after a fair hearing and be subject to a definitive verdict enforced by the executive branch, so that all affairs may be appropriately ordered and all problems adequately resolved. Easier said than done.
Yeah, this is very interesting. If you make an excessive demand, what happens? What happens is that the profit from the capital or the investor has to be returned anyways. If your cost goes up, like I remember the GM workers and Chrysler workers, about 4 years or 3 years before the collapse of the market, were demanding $55 per hour. And this is, you're talking about early 2000. So, and they would would go on strike if automation was introduced into the factory. So they had such a power. And what did capital do? They always protect the capital. So what ended up happening, they borrowed against their pension, they paid them, and but they paid the capital as well, the support of the capital. And they didn't produce any new products for almost a decade. And guess what? The company, both the largest company, which is GM at the time, just went belly up. So you see, if you abuse the power of unions and the demands hijacks and blackmails the capital has a way to defend itself. And neither side would benefit from this situation. So these mutual equitable rights of both parties should be officially fixed and established according to the laws of justice and compassion. And this is really what the ethics are that has to be introduced in the process. Okay, so now I have another enabler that is right now is introducing, which is very dangerous. You see, market changes based on innovation and technologies. But if there is an element that disrupts the market and doesn't have enough time for the workers in the capitalistic system to get retrained to do other jobs, you're going to create a social basically upheaval within the company. And that trigger already has been released, which is called artificial intelligence, which dramatically can produce goods and services that are enormously less expensive than human beings. And because of rapid rollout of this type of technology in the market, when the reduction in the labor pool occurs, there's not enough time for them to go and get absorbed into other areas of the market itself. Unfortunately, last 3 decades, the United States market has moved toward intellectual property or services. So the whole manufacturing has been basically sent overseas. And that's really where the danger is, where currently, for example, you can produce machinery to collect tomatoes cheaper than you can get foreign workers to come in and work for a few dollars an hour. But you see, but that process already started because the government, for example, in California, is setting up minimum wages that are not sustainable. And some they have gone to almost from $15 to $18 an hour. So what ends up happening when government gets intervenes in the market, the results are not very good. So now you see, I saw an article last week that even McDonald's is trying to move away from California. Several, for example, the largest producer of gasoline refinery in California are shut down and they moved out. So this is the problem when the government try to interfere and dictate pricing. Ultimately, the people lose. Temporarily, they may be happy, but at the end, they're gonna pay $7, $8. They were showing actually certain area in California, the gas has gone up to $7 or $8 a gallon. All right. Any other comments on this one? Directly here, it's explaining how to infuse ethics, morals into the system.
Yeah. Just a quick comment to that too. The film industry has also gone on strike because they have a new AI actress, So my point is that each and every single one of us, where there is no, how would you say, there is no kind of control, not or legislative or ethical balance in a mechanistic world, which we are increasingly heading toward, the human element is being disregarded. And as you say, Gilbert, it really, really does depend on this growth in consciousness and choices around the future of, the future of human beings in the face of this huge revolution of technology, and how to ride that wave and actually keep those ethics of caring for others, of the well-being of all within that. It's really huge that we're facing, all of us today. Thank you.
Of course. Any other comments on this?
Well, what you brought up are, rather, I mean, it's you brought up some interesting points. Especially when you talk about government regulations and such. The fact of the matter is just well, you have a double-edged sword. I mean, the reason why that refinery is closing, I don't think it has to do with labor. It has a lot to do with regulations, and they're talking about
That's
the
correct.
pumping of poisons. I mean, it's just, I had a friend of mine who actually, she was trained as an electrical engineer, but she got a job at a refinery in Louisiana. But when she was there, it made her sick because, I mean, she was, driving, through all that stuff. And it's just like, if you want to talk about a production of toxic materials, a refinery that refines crude oil is one of the most toxic, plants that exists. And I think what we need to do is that we need to move away from fossil fuels. And I mean, it's just like there's a lot of technology out there that has been suppressed that would alleviate. I'm not just talking about batteries and electric cars, but there's something called 0 point energy that has been brutally suppressed, something that Nikola Tesla discovered back in 1900. And if we probably would have used that technology, since, we probably wouldn't even have to worry about global warming. But like I said, that's another topic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like,
yeah. I assure you, if there was such a thing, they would have done it a long time ago. The problem is that there is no easy solution.
I didn't say it was
away-
easy. I'm just
No,
saying
of
it's
course,
there.
but the technology is not cost effective. When you're looking at, for example, wind turbines, right? They say,
Right.
well, it is using the air, but they don't talk about disposing of those when they die after 30 years. What kind of service you have to do, what kind of disruption they create, what kind of actually pollution you create by creating the steel to create them. And what is the cost of servicing them? When you're looking at those overall costs, the cost of production is way higher than you can use fossil fuel today.
Yeah.
A good example of it is that, for example, currently coal is the most polluted type of fuel, energy, basically. But you can easily replace it, very easily replace it with natural gas.
Right.
And you can replace it throughout the world by allowing extraction, and you can actually drop CO2 emission by almost 30% if you switch from coal to natural gas. The problem is that those environmentalists blocked production of natural gas, especially during.
I don't know if you know this, but during the refinery process, you could extract natural gas from the process. If you ever seen a refiner, you got this big fire thing right there. If you would have captured a lot of that natural gas that would come out during the refining process,
But yeah,
that would be free profit right there. But some of the companies don't want to do that.
like I'm acutely familiar with that industry. Actually,
Okay.
right now there are ways to get even coal plants that are in actually Virginia and northern Louisiana. They're trying to put pipelines to capture the CO2, and within this year, 2026 or 2027, they would inject it back into the ground.
Yeah.
So they can actually make this basically production of gasoline with these refineries completely zero emission. And of course, government is helping in terms of subsidizing it by paying, I think, anywhere from $80 to $150 a ton for sequestration under the ground. But this technology has existed for decades. But the minute they put basically limitation on the exhaust of these companies, but the technology to sequester it is there already, and we are actually engaged in that process ourselves. It's there in terms of reducing the emission from these giant basically power generation companies, as well as the coal-based power generation as well. But the reality is this, that they blocked, last 4 years, there were a big war going on between administration and production of basically natural resources, energy as a whole. And what ended up happening during the same period, China actually created 200 coal electrical plants a year. So whatever you save on basically in United States is dwarfs compared to what kind of pollution China is producing. And nobody talks about it. But reality is that the interim solution until new technologies comes in is to switch to the least polluting energy source, which is natural gas or liquefied natural gas, LNG.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of thorium nuclear reactor?
Well, there is a lot of these things right now. They're producing actually mini radioactive type of power plants. But remember,
That's thorium.
Right.
That's thorium. Yeah.
The problem with it is the pollution that it produces, radioactive material that nobody wants in their backyard.
Well,
So
they're
there
talking
are,
about gamma radiation, but like I said, that's another.
anyways, we can discuss this later. All righty. Thanks again. Let's go to the next one.
All right. Intervention of the government. Okay, number
Okay.
10. Number 10, the intervention of the government and the courts of the problems arising between owners and workers is fully warranted, since these are not such particular matters, as are ordinary transactions between two individuals which do not concern the public and in which the government should have no right to interfere. For problems between owners and workers, though they may appear to be a private matter, are detrimental to the common good, since the commercial, industrial, and agricultural affairs, and even the general business of the nation, all are intimately linked together. And impairment to one is a loss to all. And since the problems between owners and workers are detrimental to the common good, the government and the courts have therefore the right to intervene.
Right. So remember, these suggestions came in early 1900s, where basically if workers would strike, the owners would go and break the picket lines and bring in new workers to replace them. And obviously everybody would lose because they would sabotage the company also. And this is very interesting. So the whole key, again, relates to mediation by the government is necessary to make sure this kind of strife would not occur between labor and basically owners of the company. So this linkage between that stoppage of work hits the economy, and everybody loses that needs those products to be produced. So the cost of those goods would go higher, therefore everybody would lose. So these are really key elements where economy shrinks when you have riots or basically strikes. Now, imagine what would happen, what did happen, due political reasons. They actually, government shutdown occurred, I guess, early few months ago. And because of political maneuvering, were one side versus the other. And guess what happened? They have to pay those people for the work that was not done anyways. So what happens is that directly end up in the inflation, because you have basically distributed, although rightfully they should have earned their living, and they would get basically harmed if they don't get compensated for their expenses. But reality doesn't change. Where the goods and services that they supposed to be produced didn't get produced, that directly adds to the deficit. And therefore, it would create inflation. So as they suggested here, government should prevent strikes or shutdowns. Unfortunately, our government, left and right, both of them are challenging each other to see who can produce more political harm to the other side. So you see all these suggestions that came in during this process, I think it was early 1900, was directly related to the events that occurred at that time over a century ago, which Abdu'l-Baha provided solutions to them. Any other questions here?
Yes, just I think that this is on two areas. One, it's in the economic realm, but I think it's very important in terms of, an impairment to one is a loss to all. And since the problems between owners and workers are detrimental to the common good, there needs to be remedial intervention. And I think that it points to the macro picture, but on the micro picture, it's really about the harm of one is the harm of all. And it's a pivotal teaching of the oneness of humanity. So in everything that Abdu'l-Baha educates us in, it's on that pivotal humanizing, starting with the individual, the family, the community, the society, and the business that we conduct in our everyday lives. So I think it's you've mentioned all the economic, and they're all viable, but I would like to say that there is, each and every one of us actually are affected by the actions of others, is my point. Thank you.
No, of course, of course. But remember, all these areas that we're discussing, really, people, for political reason, they cause harm just to push their own narrative. So reality doesn't mean anything. So what is it that Abdu'l-Baha is trying to teach us here? This relates to application of ethics into socioeconomic system. So when a representative gets elected to the houses of Congress, they should disassociate themselves with their party, and they vote only for the good of all people, not their own party members. See, as a political system today in the United States, we're violating those instructions. Because if you look closely, 90-some percentage of 90% of time, people of one party vote the same way. That means they don't exist.
I've got a historic story to share with you, and it's in The Priceless Pearl, a conversation between the beloved guardian and Rahir Hanum. And they were talking about which country is the most politically corrupt. And Rahir Hanum was saying Iran. And the guardian said, no, it's America. And Rahir Hanum had to learn to suck it up. So your system will change, because ultimately there will be victory, but it's a pretty harsh road and a pretty harsh reality that you're facing, but change is inevitable. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Any other comments? If not, we're going to go to the next. We need a volunteer.
I'll read it. It's
All
my
right.
punishment for being wordy. Even in the case of differences that arise between two individuals with regard to particular rights, a third party, namely the government, is needed to resolve the dispute. How then can the problem of strikes, which entirely disrupt the whole country, whether they arise from the inordinate demands of the workers or the excessive greed of the factory owners, remain neglected?
Right. So here again, he's emphasizing how government should be moderating this process to make sure that both parties are satisfied and relinquish their greed in general. But if you look at, for example, the shutdown of government that we did impacted, for example, air transportation in the United States. So thousands of flights were delayed or canceled in period of few weeks. And guess what? When they assessed it, billions and billions of dollars were loss of productivity, because this service which government provides was not there. So you see that this kind of skirmishes, in reality, it harms everyone. So it is imperative to make sure at least the government is not the cause of shutdown. But reality is different, because people, again, for political reason of limiting influence of the other party, they do this kind of behavior just to get what they want. So it's really critical in terms of ability to resolve the issues and art of consultation, and people that are expert in that area would intervene and make sure those events will not occur. Any other comments here? Let's go to next.
Gracious God, how can one see one's fellow man hungry, destitute, and deprived, and yet live in peace and comfort in one's splendid mansion? How can one see others in the greatest need, and yet take delight in one's fortune? That is why it has been decreed in the divine religions that the wealthy should offer up each year a portion of their wealth for the sustenance of the poor and the assistance of the needy. This is one of the foundations of the religion of God, and is an injunction binding upon all. And since in this regard one is not outwardly compelled or obliged by the government, but rather aids the poor at the prompting of one's own heart, and in a spirit of joy and radiance, such a deed is most commendable, approved, and pleasing.
So this is really very interesting. It says, regardless of how efficient government distribution to poor and needy is, eventually will not be as efficient as the system of distribution by faith-based institution. And this has been proven decades and decades in terms of services that is provided to the poor, and availability of housing or food or shelter or medical help would be much more effective from non-for-profit institution or religious-based in general. So here again, the concept which exists in Baha'i religion is, after you pay all your taxes and your expenses commensurate with your revenues, whatever is left, 20% of it should be, or 19% of it should be given to universal house of justice for distribution and managing those people that need help generally. So that's really a model which is much more effective than government trying to produce or distribute funds. A good example of it we see now, where Minnesota is a good example of now how much fraud has been going on for past 5 or 6 years because of the way that the political system allowed people to open up fictitious daycare centers or feeding the children groups, and none of it actually was real. So you see the effectiveness, although on paper look very good, and they produce statistics in terms of how many kids they fed or how many daycare centers they have, but in reality, or how did they help autism kids, in reality, none of it was actually existed. So you see the abuse can occur very easily if there are not checks and balances. And usually faith-based organizations, they do this as part of their duty, charitable duty that they have. So this kind of anomaly is rare to happen in that environment. But here again, it says why a rich country like United States, people should go hungry. Why should they worry about buying their pharmaceutical needs versus putting food on the table because they can't afford it? Now, fortunately, this administration passed a favored nation law on pharmaceuticals, where now American consumer for pharmaceutical are not going to get robbed blind. So now the administration created the most favored nation.
I think it's drafted but not approved yet. It has
Okay.
to be passed in the Senate and the House,
No,
and then
I'm
it can be
sure.
signed.
Yeah, it's
It's
gonna go.
proposed. It's
Yeah,
proposed.
no, of course. But remember, this instead of us subsidizing pharmaceutical in Europe or Far East and Canada, we would pay the same money that everybody else pays. So these are really key elements, and I'm sure anybody that would go against this would lose their their political position. So it should go through fairly quickly. But the point I'm trying to make is that these are areas that justice can come to the consumer as opposed to the greed of manufacturers, which they have monopolies on certain drugs, for example. I mean, I know of many companies last few decades, they would even generics manufacturers that would come in and get some foothold in terms of percentage of market. The bigger brand name companies would buy them at a premium and then shutting them down because it's cheaper for them. They can make more money than those basically generic manufacturers. So these are anomalies that can occur in the capitalistic markets where the government should be able to regulate and make sure that consumer doesn't get ripped off in general. So again, here is that why should anybody in the United States go hungry? Why should they choose between food or medicine? Reality is that the money is there. It's not that the money is not there. It's the problem with the distribution system, with the excesses that is under the laws cannot protect the people from it. But they're moving toward that, hopefully.
And Gilbert, I just wanted to say in regards to this quote about protection of the vulnerable. You were citing the corruption, the fraud that took place in Minnesota. But what I don't think is realized is what's going to happen to the people who were needy of all of those services, and they cannot, so it further wounds a very vulnerable sector of that society, is my point. So corruption is really the thing that if we had ethics and so on, and who turned a blind eye to that for so long and let it happen? That's another point. So just making that point that there are always victims, people who are vulnerable are victimized by many, many, many groups of people. So I just wanted to make that point in a prayer offered up for the conditions and what is actually happening and happening to Native Americans who have been on this planet here and in America for centuries, who are now being incarcerated, because their citizenship is being questioned. So my point is that when you get a degree of disorder, corruption, and so on, the most vulnerable people in our community are the ones that suffer the consequences. And this quote to me is about a process of beginning to alleviate that, because it is not permissible in the sight of God, so to speak. Thank you.
No, of course, but remember, some of this was created because of open border policy that brought in over 12 million people undocumented into United States in a very short period of time. Actually, we have clients in Colorado that the hospital was saying is that their emergency room is so jammed that the Americans cannot get emergency service in the hospital because the undocumented would show up in the emergency room. And they have to service them.
I realise, Gilbert, but immigration is going to become increasingly, with global warming, a world problem. There are islands at the moment. There are tracts of lands everywhere where they are becoming places. They're uninhabitable. What are we going to do about that? And in Australia, they are going through the same process of, society saying, well, we as Australians, they're being pushed. They feel they are being pushed out of services too. So we have a global problem with this. So thank you.
Well, I assure you, we have enough land to have, I think the last estimate, my estimate is 10 years old, the population growth would normalize around 10 to 12 million people. Billion people. So at that rate, then the growth will dramatically get reduced. So what ends up happening, and there is enough land for production of food for all of us without any problem. So the issue is really not the environment would create disasters that we cannot feed ourselves. The reality is that this disparity between poor and rich is the cause of the problem. If we would have, in the 80s and 90s, would have transferred the technology that was not useful or obsolete to us into Africa, for example, they would have been right now consumer of our products. But unfortunately, we threw money at them. We threw free grains instead of helping them to develop their land. And that caused even the local agriculture that was survived for centuries completely decimated because of the method of interfering with their social, basically economic system.
And could I just reciprocate to that? I would say that Africa could have thrown to the West some very wonderful, natural and gifts that they actually possess themselves instead of becoming codependent, because that's what colonization, that's what that old 14th century methodology of suppressing or conquering nations and not listening or even being ignorant about the people that you go to conquer. When you go into another place, it would have paid. We wouldn't be in the situation we're in if we understood that people, each tribe, nation of people, all have something to contribute to the general good and well-being of humanity, not just technology. There are many, many things that are, are intrinsic, especially to Indigenous people, that they've been robbed of, that could have contributed to making our societies generally and, in other ways, rich. So even though, these countries would have appreciated the technology and so on, if you look at the advent of divine civilization, one of the biggest warnings that Abdu'l-Baha gave, he said when he wrote that, and Iran was in such a devastating situation, yes, go to Europe, look at that, but do not bring back their materialistic values. Look at their technologies and so on and so forth. And there's a whole story around that. I mean, the Japanese went to Europe to do the same thing, and they actually had people that researched Whereas the Shah of Iran went and he did very little research except have fun. And therefore, Iran was left in the condition that it was in. So my point being, this is not about, East and West. We have to learn to speak a language that shares and unites all of the qualities that God has given to each and every one of us. So that is my point. Thank you.
No, of course. But remember, that process of colonization now is occurring today in Africa by Chinese. What they do, they go and indept those nations, and obviously the money doesn't go into production of goods and services and elevating the economy. They put in basically roads and dams and so on and so forth. And obviously, 2/3 of the money disappear before it gets there. And what ends up happening when the nation gets in debt, they come in and they create their own ports in there with their own labor. When they do construction, they actually fly people from China to do construction.
Well, Gilbert, I just want to say to you that they have researched the model of colonization from Western countries, and they are now, it doesn't matter what color or what nation are using such an atrocious methodology. It matters that it's wrong. It's wrong for the very people that have something to offer. It's wrong. So thank you. I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm just saying to you that they have learned about what these models are and it came from Europe. It was given to North America, then it was to Asia, then it was to Africa. I've researched this and I know that it's been banned. Settler colonialism has been banned in the international court and we're still doing it. We are so dumb, aren't we, Gilbert?
It's almighty dollar. That's the problem. But the problem with Chinese is that when they go into a market, usually unemployment is very high. So what they do, they abuse the local people. And they were showing actually many factories that Chinese put up, and they control the labor and what they pay them, and they discard them and get the new one if somebody wants more money. So it's a modern way of basically slavery that they're practicing, actually, especially in poor countries.
And that's my point, Gilbert. It's always the vulnerable that gets victimized. That's my point. Thank you.
Oh, of course. All right, I think we came to the last minute of our presentation. For next week, we're going to start with a subject called Many Are Called, but Few Are Chosen. So anybody wants to read the closing prayer? I would appreciate it.
Aria.
Okay.
Okay. I'll say a healing prayer for the people in Iran.
Thank you so much. You read my mind. Thank you.
Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance to thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art, thou bountiful, thou knowing, thou wise.
Thank you very much. Hopefully we see everyone next week.